Well, that's right, and I didn't go through the whole theory of speech acts because I assume this audience would probably be familiar with it. But basically what we're talking about is the propositional content that's presented with a certain illocutionary force. Now, the remarkable thing about declarations is that this propositional content matches reality if the declaration is successful. But it matches reality by representing reality as already having been so changed. So the person who adjourns the meeting by saying the meeting is adjourned makes the case that the meeting is adjourned and thus achieves that direction of fit, but does it by representing the meeting as having been adjourned with that direction of fit. Again, the preacher in Austin's example says, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," makes it the case that you are husband and wife, but does so by representing you. There used to be a big debate in philosophy. Can performatives be true or false, or are they speech acts? Which is it? Well, of course, both are true. Yeah, of course, performative, if successful, is true. The man who says, "I promise," not only promises, but truly says that he promises. But the important thing to see is it's not just a description. Rather, it's a declaration that makes something the case by representing it as having been the case. Now, it's important to see you don't have to have a performative verb to do this. On all American paper currency, there is an amazing speech act. It says, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." I have to reassure myself, but that's what it said. "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." Now, I was brought up as an epistemologist, and I want to know, how do they know? They say it's legal tender, but have they really done a study to find out that it's legal tender? And the answer, of course, is it's not a report, it's a declaration. It makes it the case that this is legal tender by declaring it to be the case. So there are lots of examples. That's a declaration. That's a status function declaration. There are lots of status function declarations that are performed implicitly or performed with some other type of speech act. All that you have to do is make a representation and get people to accept it. Here's the most remarkable declaration in the history of the United States. Was a group of men in Philadelphia. They were British subjects, the king's subjects. They were not citizens, they were subjects. They were subjects of the British king in a British crown colony. And in terms that I could have used today, they said, "We declare ourselves to be a separate country." Oh yeah? How do you get away with that? You know, there's no constitutive rule that says that king's subjects in a British crown colony can simply create a nation by declaring themselves to be a nation. Status function declaration. Now, they got away with it. Why? Well, number one, they got a lot of people to accept it, but number two, they could back it with military force. They had to defeat the British. And it wasn't until really Yorktown that we succeeded. And incidentally, with the help of the French. I don't know, a lot of Americans have forgotten that fact, that we could not have existed without help from the French. But in any case, this is a case where a status function declaration was performed that was totally unauthorized. They had no right to do that. They just did it. How do you get away with it? You get people to accept it. Now, later on, some people inspired by them decided to do the same thing. We declare that we are the Confederate States of America. Didn't work. They had problems with that. There's no guarantee of success, but if you can get people to accept it and accept it over the long haul, it becomes like the weather. It becomes as if it were like gravity. Most of institutional reality is invisible to us because we simply take it for granted. And indeed, maybe it works better if we're not sure about how it works. When I lecture on these matters in Italy, people sometimes tell me, "Don't use marriage as an example." Well, you see, I don't care what people believe about marriage as long as it works as a status function. That's all that matters to me. If it needs help from overhead, okay, that's all right with me. But I'm interested in the institutional reality. I hope we're not through. There are more questions. Oh, okay. This person here, yeah.
Hi, and good morning. I wanted to ask you a question because I read an article you wrote a while back called "What is Language?"
Yeah.
And in that article, if I understood it correctly, you make you distinguish language as an intrinsic human faculty
Yeah.
that has two characteristics. It's deontic and it's natural. It's naturalistic. So I was wondering if my understanding of if I'm correct in understanding that when we talk about language, there are two levels of language.
Yes.
There is language as an institutional fact,
Yeah.
which is the language that when we utter sounds, we assign function and meaning to these sounds. And then another level of language, which you discuss in this article, which has these two characteristics.
Yes.
Somehow it's intrinsic to humans.
Yeah. Okay, no, I'm grateful for the question. In fact, this whole lecture is kind of a long footnote to that article. And one of the themes that I'm getting at is that the traditional categories that we make in Western civilization between mind and body or nature and culture, those are all mistaken. We ought to think of language and society as natural expressions of our biological nature. And indeed, this notion of direction of fit, that's a direct application of the fact that we have these two ways biologically of relating to reality. We have the sensory nervous system and the motor nervous system. We have a mind-to-world nervous system and a world-to-mind nervous system. So I'm trying to get out of the traditional dichotomies, the idea that we live in two worlds, the mental and the physical, or three worlds, the mental, the physical, and the cultural. We live in one world. And in that world, we ought to think of language as much a part of nature as we think of photosynthesis or digestion. All of these are natural phenomena, and I'm talking about how the human beast, as a natural consequence of language, which is itself a natural consequence of its biological capacities, creates all of these marvelous human institutions. But that is the picture that I have, and I'm trying to overcome the traditional way that we have of dividing the ontology of reality into these separate compartments of mind and body, or mind, body, and culture. It's all part of the same phenomenon, and I want to give an account of institutional reality that shows how you get from protons to presidents and from electrons to elections. All of these are parts of the same basic reality. Okay, one more. There's a guy at the back.
It's just a comment, really.
Yeah.
I find your status function a little bit oppressive.
Can you speak into the mic?
I find your status function a little bit oppressive and restricting.
Yeah.
When you talk about marriage, a great number of people would think themselves not married through the status function, but in the eyes of the Lord. So,
yes.
So there you have another dimension which doesn't seem possible to be covered by what you're saying.
Yes. No, I don't. It's indifferent to me how people think of the